Hello everyone, I'm Eli Echt-Wilson.
I'm Albert.
And for our project, we created a detailed computational model of tree growth. So global warming and increased carbon dioxide emissions have become a large problem for today's society. A common way of reducing our carbon footprint is through the use of tree plantations, which sequester carbon at up to 30 times the rate of old-growth forests. However, a common problem within these tree plantations is that optimal planting conditions are difficult to determine because they take long experiments where you have to plant trees, wait for them to grow, and then collect your data. So a computational model of tree growth that could quickly predict if and how a tree will grow given a certain environment could be very useful to optimize these planting conditions. This is just one application out of a variety of different applications that we see for a computational model of tree growth. Current tree models are not necessarily capable of predicting growth at this detailed a level, either because they have too simple a representation of a tree, or they're not based on biological accuracy. On those lines, current work in tree modeling generally falls into two categories, either rule-based or image-based modeling. Rule-based modeling is modeling based on biological accuracy. For example, the work of Carl Nicholas and Sean Hammond, they program biological rules into their model and use it to model light competition in a forest. Specifically, they program allometric rules into their model, which are finite relationships between different values on a tree that hold true for all trees. And again, they use this to model light competition in a forest. As you can see, a slight issue with their model is the fact that they have a very simple representation of a tree. They treat a tree as a single cylindrical trunk with a hemispherical canopy over it. And we'd like to improve on this representation. The other is an image-based model, which is used in movie and gaming industries to create visually appealing copies of real trees, but it's not at all based on biological accuracy. So the approach that we took was to combine powerful computational techniques to model underlying biological processes that retain the specificity and accuracy of an image-based model while improving upon and retaining the biological accuracy of a rule-based model. With that in mind, Albert will talk about the biological model.
Here's just a brief overview of how our model works. First, we propagate light from the sun throughout the canopy, allowing us to calculate light values at all parts of our tree. We use the light values at leaves to calculate the carbon generated from photosynthesis, and we sum that up across all leaves to calculate our total carbon budget, which is the amount we can use for growth. First, we apportion 40% of this to the roots. We don't explicitly model roots, but it's important to acknowledge that they're there, and so we use that percentage. Next, we use the majority of the carbon budget towards growing segments in width proportional to the stress experienced, which I'll talk about in a bit. And finally, we use the rest towards branching, which involves creating new segments and leaves, allowing us to recalculate our carbon budget from photosynthesis, starting the process all over again. This happens every year. When trees are under stress, they release the hormone auxin, which then stimulates the growth of cambium, or secondary growth, growing in width. We take into account two forces when calculating our stress, gravity and wind. We sum the two stresses based on those two forces and add a proportion of it to the width of each segment each year. As this video plays, I'm going to be talking a little bit about what's going on. You notice at the bottom of the simulation, the shadow shows varying levels of light. The chance of branching in our model is proportional to the light available at the target branching location. You also notice that in this simulation and in the next one, some parts of the tree die off. And this occurs because the amount of carbon they're generating from photosynthesis is less than the amount they're using to grow in width. And so we prune them off. An essential part of our model is seeing how our tree responds to environmental conditions. Here, we varied the light conditions, causing the skewed shadow. And you'll notice that as the tree grows, it starts growing into the sun, into the light, and this exhibits phototropism, which I'll go into detail later. We also subjugated our tree to harsh conditions, extremely increasing wind speeds to high levels, and you'll notice that as the tree progresses, it can't really handle the stress, and so large parts of it die off. We also wanted to look at competition of light between trees. Here we planted a plantation of trees, and throughout the cycle in the simulation, you'll notice the trees start growing upwards rather than outwards compared to the previous ones to maximize the amount of light absorbed.
So those simulations were shown in real time, And in order to create a program that ran that efficiently, we had to use a variety of computational techniques. A typical tree, just for your information, has about 9,000 segments and 2,600 clouds of leaves. And as Albert described the biological model, that's a lot of different calculations for the computer to be doing. So we had to use a variety of these computational techniques in order to do that efficiently. Code was written in Java through the Eclipse environment with visualization in OpenGL, and I'll go into detail on a few of these techniques. The first of them is a voxel grid, which can be thought of as a three-dimensional index of space, with each voxel being a pixel of volume. And each voxel stores certain information about the space it occupies, for example, the amount of light traveling through it in each direction, as well as whether that space is taken up by tissues of the tree. This allows us to both propagate light through the canopy, as you saw in the simulations, as well as to prevent multiple branches from taking up the same space and prevent collisions. The next is recursion with caching. Recursion is a computing technique used to split up a large complex problem into a series of smaller similar problems. A tree can be thought of as a naturally recursive data structure because one tree can be thought of as a collection of smaller trees where each branch is its own tree. So recursion is essential for the majority of calculations and updates that we carry out on our tree. We also use caching, which is a computing technique where we store calculated information until it is changed and needs to be recalculated. And this greatly increases the efficiency of our program and prevents us from recalculating things that haven't changed. We also use multi-threading, which is a computing technique where you have different cores in the computer handle different aspects of the computing process. In our program, one core of the computer handles the updating of the tree, while another core of the computer handles the graphics output. And this allows our model to simulate up to 4 times as fast. Lastly, we implemented a wraparound world using modular arithmetic. As you can see in the picture here, as a branch goes off one side of the world, it comes in on the other side. And this allows us to eliminate any edge effects that would be caused in our simulation, and also essentially allow us to simulate a small plot within an infinite forest, which is very useful when it comes to measuring things for our applications.
Even with all those powerful computational techniques, our model wouldn't be very useful if it didn't mirror real-world values. So we took a look at 377 species of angiosperms, shown in the red. We looked at allometric rules, which, as Eli said earlier, are finite relationships between different parts of a tree that generally hold true for all trees. So our data in the green was compared against those species of angiosperms in the red. Here we took a look at the total mass compared to the foliage mass or leaf mass. And as I scroll through some of these, the height versus diameter, diameter versus foliage mass, and diameter versus woody tissue mass, you'll notice that although there is some variation between our data and the real world data, generally ours do match up with those values, giving us some form of validation that our trees do exhibit growth characters similar to real trees. We also looked at some emergent properties that are characteristic of real trees, such as phototropism, which is the tendency to grow into the light. You notice that the tree on the right has experiencing skewed light conditions, and so its growth is skewed to look at that. We also looked at anemotropism, which is the tendency of trees to grow shorter in height but wider in diameter and high wind speeds to deal with the additional stress. The tree on the left experienced lower wind speeds, and so you'll notice it's a lot taller but less wide compared to the tree on the right.
After we had confirmed that our model grows very similarly to real-world trees, we decided to take it back to the original application, which is determining optimal planting conditions in tree plantations. So we ran experiments where we ran simulations at 14 different spacings between trees, each one 10 times, and we measured either the average carbon uptake of the plot or the average timber production of the plot based on tree spacing. The results are shown in the graph here. It's interesting to note that actually the optimal spacing for these 2 different applications is different. And this just shows the potential of a model such as this in quickly determining optimal planting conditions for a variety of different applications, whatever they are. In conclusion, we feel that we've developed a unique model of tree growth that demonstrates global characteristics of growth that all trees follow. And we think it's really important to note that our model is the first to exhibit these characteristics without having them being explicitly programmed into the model, as previous models have done, but rather the model gives rise to these characteristics as a result of the accuracy of underlying biological processes. This not only allows us to simulate tree growth at a higher level of accuracy and detail than what previous models have done, but it also offers a possible explanation for why these global allometric patterns emerge. We believe that we've created a good foundation for future work that can be done on this project. Some future work that we would plan to do is modeling roots, which would allow us to take into account water conditions and therefore allow us to model tree growth in a wider diversity of climates. Additionally, we have a parameters class for the tree that we would like to vary parameters and model lots of different species of tree, which would, again, help in our applications. With that, we'd like to thank the people who helped us on our project, as well as the Siemens Foundation and Discovery Education and the George Washington University for this experience and the opportunity to present our research.
Thank you.
Thank you.